Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the Digital Pavilion called Let's Get Digital. If you can't read that, well, it's up there for you, for your review. This is the first of a number of sessions that we've created as a panel series. My name's Kurt Bauer, and I could get blamed for being behind this if it's not good, so be gentle. So I want to welcome you. These sessions are intended to be interactive, so we've got microphones on the side. If you have questions, shoot your hands up, and we'll get a microphone in your hands, so be gentle with that too. I want to turn this over to Mr. Harley, who is going to give us an overview of Let's Get Digital. Thanks a lot for being here.
Well, thanks everyone for coming to the show and supporting this great show. It's really turned into a great venue. Today's topic is how to get the best sound from digital media. And we've assembled quite a panel of experts who bring diverse talents to the question. At the far end, on my left, is John Schaffer of Wadia Digital. And Wadia, as you might know, is one of the real pioneers in digital audio. They were the first, in my knowledge, to bring software-based digital filtering to D to A converters. And I remember having their Model 2000 back in 1989, yep. And it was revelatory at the time.
Thank you, Robert.
Next to him, we have Rob Darling of Sooloos. And I don't know if you've seen a Sooloos system, but I had one in my house for about 2 months, and it completely changed the way I related to my music collection. So if you haven't spent any time with a Sooloos, you absolutely have to spend 10 minutes in front of one. It's extremely cool. And then in the middle there, we have Paul McGowan. Paul is the P in PS Audio, and he's one of the prototypical high-end founders, where he started this company literally on his kitchen table, building a phono preamp in 1973. So Paul's been at it for quite a while.
You calling me old there, boy?
Venerable.
Venerable. Oh, God.
And next to Paul, we have Cookie Marenco, is the founder of Blue Coast Records, and she brings a different perspective to the question of getting the best sound from digital. She comes from the professional arena, doing high-resolution recordings, and she brings an audiophile sensibility to recordings, which is kind of rare these days. And then at the far right, or your left, is Karl Schuster, and he's president of Empirical Design, which makes very high-quality, reasonably priced cables, among other things. And Karl is an expert on PC-based media servers. And Karl wrote an article for us in The Absolute Sound about 1.5 years ago on how to do it yourself. So we have quite a range of talent here. Before we get to the specifics of how to get the best sound from digital, I'd like to give a little overview of where we are today and why we're talking about digital sound quality in the year 2008. If you remember back to 1982 and the marketing slogan for compact disc, perfect sound forever. Remember that? Well, that idea has permeated the culture, where people think that because it's ones and zeros, it's perfect. And this myth was perpetuated in a popular science article where it said that compact disc had perfect mathematical precision. And that's kind of an odd idea. The idea that the ones and zeros are the same, the sound has to be the same. So these are some of the questions I'd like to talk about today, and particularly with an emphasis on hard disk drives, because that's a really hot topic today. Music is moving increasingly to hard disk, and some of the questions we have, do hard disk drives sound better than optical disk drives? Should I make the leap into a hard drive-based system now? And what are the best formats? And hard disk drive gives us the opportunity to leapfrog digital media or physical media and go right to high-resolution downloads. So this is a really exciting time, I think, for digital audio. And we want to talk about what products are available today and what we're going to have available in the near future and high-resolution digital audio. And a question a lot of people have is, do I buy a turnkey music server like a Sooloos, or do I do it myself and buy a sound card and build it on my own? And I had letters to the editor after we reviewed music servers saying, why would I spend $5,000 or $10,000 on a music server when I can buy a PC and do it myself? Well, it's easier said than done, but that's a good question to look at. And then we should also talk about alternative product categories now and in the immediate future. What's going to be coming up in the future? I know PS Audio is coming out with a device that looks very interesting that's kind of a music server and it's kind of not a music server. So maybe we can talk about that. And finally, is CD the last packaged music format, packaged media music format, or will Blu-ray become a high-res music carrier? The Blu-ray specification includes an audio-only format that can carry multi-channel digital audio at 196 kilohertz 24-bit. So is Blu-ray the way to go, or should we bypass physical media and go directly to high-res downloads? So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the audience for questions. Someone has to have a question about one of those subjects.
You can't have a puppy, no.
Here we
I don't
go.
care what your mom said, you can't have a puppy.
I'll start it off, Robert. Is this live? My name is Gerald Perry, and it seems to me that the biggest issue with whether it's a hard drive based or a media based would be, you put the word up there that I was looking for, timing and jitter, and then the DACs. You know, it's 90%, in my opinion, is the problem is in there. So what is that? If that's not right, I'd like to hear about it, and how can we look forward to hard drive systems with good timing and jitter, and with good DACs?
Which of you would like to take that?
I'll jump in. I mean, to answer that, I mean, the way we started was in looking a little bit for that answer. My background actually is as an engineer and a producer. I worked at a place called the Hit Factory in New York, and we made a lot of digital records, a lot of them. I mean, 3 days a week we were making 48-track digital records. And, you know, I have this background. I don't have maybe some of the hate relationship with digital that I think anybody in the consumer world is going to have. Largely because I think the CD did a lot to digital that maybe digital didn't always deserve. There was a lot to be learned, I think, in the early days of digital. A lot of early digital records were badly made, right? If I'm an engineer and I walk into a room and say, if I'm one of the early engineers making digital records, this is probably a day that might cost $150,000. It's very expensive, right, to have an orchestra out there in a room and everything else. And I'm going to take the microphones I know, and I'm going to put them in the places that I know, and then I'm going to hit record. And that's going to get me a bad record on digital if I've been using those microphones on tape for the last 25 years of my career, right? So there was a lot of bad stuff done in the early days of digital. And then after that, CDs were very imperfect. But by the time I was making records, I saw a lot of engineers who were making great digital records. Really, really good ones. Things that sounded great. Things that you really didn't realize it was digital, all right? And I would see this, but then I would go listen to CDs of the same record and they sounded horrible. I'd start making things completely digital inside of digital consoles with hard disk systems in the mid-90s, and I go to play them back off a CD and it sounds bad. So I started experimenting with taking all the CDs and putting them on hard drives and playing them back that way. And it becomes pretty clear at that point, if you do that on a regular basis, that playing back off a CD, no matter how good that transport is, isn't really that great. We share store space with an awful lot of very good transports. All of our dealers are LIN dealers or name dealers, or run down the list, DCS, whatever it is. Companies can make great transports, but it's a fairly universal experience. We find that customers would rather hear the music coming off a hard drive given the same DAC than they would off a transport. So that becomes pretty easy to me. Like, the disc is wobbling all over the place. The amount of work you have to do to make a CD sound good is huge. Now, are there other things? Are there other trade-offs, other things to be learned, new pitfalls to have in using hard disks and computers and networking to move music around? Yeah. You know, there's definitely stuff we got to pay attention to. It's a new set of things, right? You got to pay attention to other stuff. But I think there's an enormous opportunity to escape CDs as a delivery of digital audio. Digital has been kind of thrown under the truck by CDs for a long time, and kind of liberated as far as I'm concerned.
I would agree with what Rob said, but one of the interesting things to think about is it's fascinating to me that, and I'm sure you figured this out as well, that you can take something from a CD, which is an imperfect medium, put it onto a hard drive, and it sounds good. So what we started with, being transferred to another medium, sounds good. So obviously what was here wasn't bad in the first place. Because if you took something from here and you put it here and then you play it back and it sounds good, what happened in between? So I don't think it's the medium. I don't think that really makes a whole lot of difference. The medium, if you store it in bit perfect fashion, so each bit is identical to the master, how you retrieve that data and what you do with it is really what makes the difference. So
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I know you know
real-time audio playback versus
right.
a CD versus in audio.
Well,
format,
and you touched
yeah.
on that,
Yeah.
that you have a CD that's sitting around wobbling and doing all that, and a typical CD mechanism, when you pull that data off, clocking it through the system, you're going to have trouble. It's not going to sound so good. Once you've got it onto a hard drive, which is basically a big memory, you don't have those problems. Hard drives don't have a clock associated with them in the same way that a CD or taking the SPDIF data stream does. So I just like to make the distinction that it isn't the CD and it isn't the hard drive. It's the way you take the data off and transfer it to something that, a DAC or whatever. And I think we could probably all agree on that sort of thing. As Robert was mentioning, we have a new player that sort of plays off on that. So our player has a standard CD-ROM drive, which if you listen to it direct, it really sounds pretty crappy. If you put it into a memory and play it out of the memory, whether that memory is a solid state memory or a hard drive, doesn't really make any difference. If you do it properly, it sounds as good as a hard drive because in essence, it is a hard drive. It's a stored medium. Does that make sense? So that's why a memory player, as differentiated from a CD player, can sound as good as a hard drive player. And so I just wanted to make that distinction, that it isn't so much the medium, it's how you deal with what's on the medium and transfer it.
Yeah, I see a couple of fuzzy faces. Just to clarify here, all right, I've got a CD and it's playing and it's going, woo, 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 it's wobbling like, I mean, the CD is probably one of the craziest consumer devices ever made. I think we all agree on that. Like, you're talking about this disc spinning like crazy, aiming at things that are like measured in nanometers with a laser. Like multiple lasers all shooting at it at the same time and then moving this way.
It's actually amazing that it works.
It's amazing that it can work at all. It's crazy, right? So now you say I've got a disc that's spinning like this, and then out here I have a digital output. And I have to take those ones and zeros, and I actually have to have them coming off of there in some synchronized fashion, very regularly. And then the way that they're coming off in their little march step, X number of times a second, fashion has to lock up to the digital output here, and it has to do that smoothly. That's difficult to do in real time, okay? Whereas I can take that same set of lasers and I can take that same set of disks and I can spin it around and I can pull the ones and zeros off and I can read a section. And then I generate a checksum. I take all the ones and zeros and I add them up. And then I read it again. And I say, did I get the same ones and zeros again the second time around? If I got it the second time around, you know what? Astronomically speaking, there's not a chance I'm wrong.
Which is not what a CD player, sorry, which is not what a CD player does.
A CD player can't really do that, right? So this is the benefit you get from treating a CD as a data entity rather than as a real-time Redbook audio playback thing. I think that's what we're talking about here is Redbook audio CD playback versus the actual treatment of a CD as a data source.
And I think one of the things that we've run into as well is that we've, for 20-odd years, in the high-end industry, have been taking what we were given with CD and working at all of these various things that you need to do to improve that. So a lot of you have a pretty good idea of what is necessary to the various things that are needed in terms of power supply and mechanical isolation to get CD players and transports to work well, and why good ones tend to cost a fair amount of money. And one of the interesting things with the music server thing and putting them on a hard drive is a lot of those things, for exactly these reasons, just go out the window. There's a lot of things that once you've got that data extracted from the disk, stored on a hard drive, that a lot of those very extraordinary measures that we've needed to go to historically to get great CD playback, we just don't have to worry about quite as much so anymore. You still have to get that signal over there to your DAC without getting messed up, but and worry about power supply, grounding issues, and all the rest of that inside a computer environment. But a lot of those things, it sort of lowers the cost of entry as well in terms of the performance that you can get out of it.
The other things that remain all can be done in software. So for example, there are fundamental sync errors that exist between what the motor thinks is going on in a CD player and where the actual laser is, right? Because you've got this laser that moves back and forth like this, from the inside of this to the outside of the disk as the disk spins, right? So there's supposed to be a feedback mechanism that tells the transport where the laser is. They're always a little bit wrong, right? Like there's just always something inherently like messy in them. But it's consistent. If you take the same transport and you measure tens of thousands of users around the world, it will actually be a consistent pattern to that sync error. All right, there are softwares that watch the user community out there, put together a big database, figure out what the sync errors are. There are things that you can do like this, and good softwares do that. Like for example, Exact Audio Copy is one of the ones that people know well and is used well. These are some of the things that can be done as well.
There's a variability in CD sound quality, even if the ones and zeros on two disks are the same. And I think by copying to a hard drive, it reduces that variability or eliminates that variability, because some of the things that Rob was talking about. I had an interesting experience in 1988. I worked in a CD mastering lab, and our customer service representative called me and said that one of our CD clients for whom we had replicated discs got the finished disc and said that the disc didn't sound like the master tape. And so I wasn't able to compare the two because one was on a 3/4 inch U-matic tape and one was on a CD, so I couldn't run them into the same D-to-A converter. So I was interested, and the engineers that I worked with were the bits is bits mentality. These were really bright guys. We built these $1 million laser mastering machines, and they said, well, if the data on the tape and the data on the disc are identical, the sound's identical, and we've done our job. And if the guy doesn't like the sound, well, that's too bad. We did our job. But I was curious about it, so I cut the disc. I cut the master tape. Well, I did a bit-for-bit comparison between the master tape and the disc, and not surprisingly, they were identical. So I cut another disc, and we replicated 1,000 discs, cut on a different mastering machine. And this time the client was thrilled, and he said, yeah, this is what my music should sound like. He didn't say specifically what it was. He didn't use audiophile terms to describe the sound, but he said the sound was ruined. So now I had two CDs, and I could listen to them, and they did sound different. And they had identical ones and zeros on them. I did a bit-for-bit comparison in a CD-ROM pre-mastering system. And I did some research, because this is an important topic for someone in the business of replicating CDs. You'd want to know if there's this analog-like variability, even though the ones and zeros are the same. So I did some research and found out that the pit structures on the disc that didn't sound as good had some variation in the lengths. CD has 9 discrete pit and land lengths, and I did a jitter analysis looking at the pit lengths, and it had a greater frequency distribution on the disc that didn't sound as good, and I was able to trace that back to the rotational servo system on one of the mastering machines. So it's an interesting thing that the physical structures in the pits on a CD end up producing an analog-like variability in the output. And it kind of flies in the face of everything you think about digital, where the ones and zeros are the same. But that happened to me in 1988, and I've never looked at digital audio the same way since.
Yeah, I want to expand on what's been said too, and kind of address the question about, so when you're looking at digital audio or digital data, is it just about jitter and the DACs? And I think we've all of us who have systems know that every part in the chain matters. Everything makes a big difference. And but when you're talking about digital, it's not so much the source. What really matters is the accuracy of the extraction, and then controlling for timing errors that we refer to as jitter. And the ability to be able to move data from one place to another without introducing additional timing errors or without losing some of the accuracy of the extraction. And so you can't necessarily say that one source is automatically better than another. What matters is the accuracy of the ability to address the distortions that occur in the digital domain. So a hard drive-based system that takes data off of a disk using software and is able to not do things in real time can spend the time necessary to ensure an accurate extraction, and that's really important. And we're finding out that having a perfect extraction is really critical. But the other part, which Robert was referring to, is then the jitter content. And that's equally important. So you have to solve both. And it's really interesting, if you listen to a system that's bit perfect, very accurate, and has high jitter, it will sound great. But it will have a distortion that you'll recognize. If you listen to a system that is not bit perfect, a CD player playing back a disc in real time, and it then plays through the system, and there is you're counting for jitter errors, it sounds different. And it can sound great, but it can also have a distortion that you recognize, and the two don't sound the same. And so you're comparing accuracy in the data and also accuracy in timing errors. And to say one or the other is automatically better is not the answer. The answer is you got to correct both. You have to account for both, and you can do that with hard disk-based systems or memory-based systems very well. And with CD players, the challenge is that read the discs in real time is how accurate that original extraction is, and then what are the technologies you're employing for controlling jitter, either eliminating it or reducing it. So there's not a clear answer, but the thing that we're finding is that by and large, computer-based systems are going to do a wonderful job of the data extraction, and then clocking out becomes less of an issue. And so the trade-off that people are hearing is that they're preferring the accuracy over the timing errors. But the timing errors are equally, I would say, as important. It's another form of distortion. So you have to really pay attention to both. And so when you're looking at how do I build up a system or what do I consider as my source, you have to look at it globally. You have to look at all of the variables. There's not one silver bullet.
Another problem that you're going to run into, and I'll just bring this up because I know it's a later question on that, in computer-based systems is getting it out of the computer is a serious problem. If you have it on a hard drive, if you take it out with his system or you take it out with my system or somebody else's system, it's going to sound different. And that's a serious problem. Like USB is a way to get it out, which pretty much sucks. There's a number of ways, TCP/IP, you can transfer it out. A number of ways of doing it, but that's a really big issue that I don't think there's a lot of agreement that I'm aware of, and how to get it out.
It's the biggest thing, and well, it boils down to I think one of the there's a word that's up here that's probably it's the most powerful word, but it's also the most misunderstood word. I think is jitter. I think one of the things that's interesting about jitter is it's endemic to all digital systems. There will always be jitter in a digital system. But I think what's maybe not understood about jitter is that jitter is roughly akin to the word distortion in terms of its actual meaning. If somebody says to you, I have 3% distortion in my system, you will look at them and you will ask them, what kind of distortion is that? Is it a harmonic distortion? Is it this? I mean, there's a million ways to look at the idea of distortion. And we're many, many years into coming up with tests